Steve Watkins, welcome to Free Your Voice.
Thank you so much. It's an honor to be here, Dustin.
You and I were in the pre show, we were talking about spiders because I had this spider that was the size of Tyrannosaurus Rex that just decided to come into my studio. You're not afraid of spiders?
I am not afraid of spiders, but I don't do great with snakes, which is, I don't know why. It's not based in logic.
Why? Like, what was snakes? Snakes don't scare me, but spiders, even if they're like microscopic, like those clover mites size, I'm so afraid. Do you remember them back in the day, those clover mites, like the little red ones? They're on everything if you were at a sports field or a wall.
No, and maybe that's why I'm not afraid of them because I'm ignorant.
You don't see them. Well, I see them. I'm like, I think that might be a spider 100 yards from here.
It's so funny. And let me try and transition just a bit because when I was in high school, I went into the Army and then we wound up having not one, but two wars. And I was no more nervous in war than I am right now talking with you, my friend. And yet we don't get to decide where our bravery is or where our fear is. It just kind of is there. Now we can work on it through exposure therapy, but I don't know why God chose to grant me serenity amid gunfights and blasts. But that's just how he did. But you get me around a snake, and I'm running for the door. So it's
And
just
that's
it's
the one
it,
that gets. See, I'm not afraid of the bullies, but I am afraid of a little spider. So it's interesting. You're right. Kind of what chooses us, but courage. Courage is one of these things. Courage is not having fear. Courage is not allowing fear to stop you. And
yes,
you went
yes.
into the world of politics, became a
Mm.
congressman. I mean, you're talking, at least from my perspective, that's very scary. That's very fearful. And you didn't let it stop you.
I'd love to say it comes from the result of meditation, faith in a higher power, what have you. And there's truth to that. Those are drivers, but it's more so. I just don't care what when people say negative things about me. Like before I went into politics, I was a white blonde Christian American living in a war torn uh, Arab Muslim world in Iraq and Afghanistan. So I've heard it all before. I'm very familiar with people hating me by virtue of just who I am, what my face looks like. And so in politics, almost like what frightens us and what's not, what doesn't, politics was suited well for me because I simply didn't care that people were going to say horrible things about me. And you're going to become controversial, which is ridiculous because growing up, I people would describe me as anything but. I'm very boring. It's very boring.
You ran towards controversy. Now, going back to war, that old song, War, what is it good for?
Yeah.
The wars that we've been involved, knowing what you know now, and I know you're not speaking on behalf of every person you know in this world, but knowing what you know, should we have gotten involved in the wars that have happened?
That's a great question. And I believe that history will be kinder to us on our decision to enter Afghanistan. That satisfies the justice of war, use ad bellum, the justice of going to war, which is a political decision, not a military one. When should we fight? Well, it seemed like a proportionate response in the wake of 9/11. I think that history will be less kind to us when looking at our invasion of Iraq and toppling Saddam Hussein, even though he was a horrible, horrible man, a tyrant of the first order. I it, it's harder to argue that we satisfied the rules of war in engaging.
I have to ask you, why do we put people into power? Why do we vote people into power that clearly have shown that they aren't going to be the best leaders?
Well, that's a great question. Um, it goes straight to the heart of electoral politics, something which I studied extensively. I got essentially a master's at Harvard, focusing mainly on electoral politics, what motivates a constituency to vote for who they do. And it's a multivariant equation. There are several reasons, and one's culture depends on that. For example, I don't think it's a coincidence that the Arab world has a preponderance of royal families as their governing structure. Oh, heavy-handed tyrants sometimes that works for them, and a republic or democracy, it doesn't work as well for them. And so that's something hard, because when we go to help somebody out, our inclination is to help them out in a way that we want to be helped out.
You're saying that the intentions are good. They're not conspiracy
Absolutely.
driven, like let's
I don't
get so
believe
we can
so.
take over your whole country and buy all your oil for cheap. And so because we hear a number of these conspiracies that come out now that say, well, clearly, Iraq was only about one very wealthy, prominent, known family in the US that was looking to gather a bunch of oil and gas and energy and anything else. That there's so many conspiracies around.
There's a lot of conspiracy. Now, I'm not a conspiracy thinker. That's just not how I think. I first, in from my perspective of being in the military, being a defense contractor in the military, and also being in politics, there is a lot of pragmatic evidence to suggest that there was not a conspiracy. Let me give you an example. Maybe a little off on the numbers, but the war on terror, the U.S. has spent $9 trillion allocated, and in total,
Wow.
people will say up to $60 trillion.
How can that be justified though?
Let me finish my point.
Okay.
Okay, because I'm not arguing that it was justified, but I'll get to my point. My point is, Vice President Cheney, the gross benefit, financial benefit that he gained from his relationship with Halliburton was $35 million. 35 million. So we're going to say that a guy who makes it to VP is so hungry for 35 million, which he had earned half of that already, and that he's so hungry for money that he's going to commit the world's hegemon into a war, help facilitate that, and cause unknown amounts of deaths and casualties, spend tons of the American taxpayers' dollars when it's well needed elsewhere for 35 million. I guarantee you that Dick Cheney is made from the kind of stuff that allows him to go off and make millions of dollars in any number of different ways.
So what do you think this is like for him? I mean, imagine that and I'm not saying everybody was calling him this, but there were some major conspiracies that were going around that were almost making him out to be a mastermind.
Right.
There was clearly a mastermind behind it and this person's intentions. Like, why do we come up with these things? Because remember during COVID, I remember one group of conspiracy people, and if you said, "Well, you're listening to the wrong news," and I go, "No, I couldn't get away from it. It was everywhere I was turning." There was this group that was claiming that what Bill Gates, all the good he was doing, is putting chips in people. I mean, I mean, it's ludicrous.
It's very easy. To me, that's not the biggest mystery. It's simply because certain media sells, and you know this better than most, better than me. And that is, if it bleeds, it leads. If the media is in the entertainment industry, and they need to sell papers, they need to
Clickbait.
get clicks, they need to, and nobody's going to be like read a stuffy article about you know what Dick Cheney wrestled over, and President Bush wrestled over, regarding the justice of war. They're going to click on the one, it's conspiracy. Oh my gosh! And so that's pretty evident. We're seeing more of that, and I'll tell you just one last note on that is that makes long form podcasts like yours so much more valuable, because quite frankly, your mainstream mass media, especially to people 30 years old and younger, it's dead, it's gone. Well, people who vote are older than 30 years old disproportionately, but in another generation, people are getting their news from people like you, podcasts like Joe Rogan and Lex Friedman and Ben Shapiro. And gone are the days, and that's why they're desperate, and their articles are becoming more and more sensationalized. And I was the victim of that, and so is my family.
Yeah.
And it's bad because because we at the local level, the papers don't have a checks and balances like we do at the national level.
Well, there's no defending yourself. I mean, if once it's look, the internet lives
Yeah.
forever. And I got to ask you because this was Recently in the Wall Street Journal, was reading this morning. By the way, what news publications like start like can you start your day off? Like, what do you read?
I'm a Ben Shapiro guy. I'm a Republican. He's a very heady thinker. I like where he lands on most of the issues.
Any newspapers? Do you get any newspapers delivered?
No,
I'm like the old fashioned. I like the ink on my hand, and
you're an old soul. I can see that.
I am. I like to read the newspaper, and it doesn't like. And the problem is, by the time I get the paper, it's old, and I'm like, son of a gun. I read most of the stuff like 3 years ago. It's now hitting me.
I will read The Hill. I'll read the Washington Post. I'll read Stars and Stripes. I'll read the Kansas City Star. Although I'd never give them credit for being any good. They're very, very unfair. Topeka Capital Journal is the same way, but Anchorage Daily News, because those are the states that I've lived in, it's residents of, and so I'm always interested in in what's going on as a general matter. But I certainly don't trust their reporting on politics.
The onboarding process. I was very curious about this. What is the onboarding process when you become a congressman? All right, you win. You won. All right, the date happens. I don't know what the date is. December 15th.
Yeah,
What happens? Like what's the onboarding like?
it's so. God, this is going to make me sound like a kid, but it's so cool. It's just amazing. You're ushered to DC, housed in a hotel, teeming with security, with multiple perimeters around the block. You're there with everybody else. I was in the incoming class of the so-called squad, so there was a lot of star power with AOC and Rashida Tlaib and Ilhan Omar. Dan Crenshaw it was in my class. He was actually a classmate of mine at Harvard. He and I were both there at the same time and had projects together, so I knew him well. And so these are I call them kids because they're all younger than I am. But these are kids who have crushed it basically at doing what it is they intend to do for the last couple of years. And so you're there, and then you're uh, you're taken through this process of getting your office through a lottery system. You pick your staff. You're interviewing people for chief of staff. You're interviewing legislative directors and such. You're making tough decisions about, gosh, somebody helped me out in the campaign. What loyalties do I have to that? What promises were made? If well, promise made is a promise kept. But they were there for me when no one else was. But I don't think that they would do as good a job as somebody who has experience in that job. So you're faced with some tough HR decisions, but in all, it's cool. You hop in as a group. That's kind of one of the last times you're together in a bipartisan way. You get to know each other quite well. Like I say, I don't say this often. I might not have ever said it publicly, actually, but I actually got along fantastic with AOC and Ilhan Omar, especially. Here, Omar and I were in foreign affairs together and education and labor together. Those two committees.
Do they start tapping? They just say, "Hey, we've got this cool committee. We think you'd be perfect." Like, is it like you go to college, you start signing up for things?
Committees are kind of considered everything. It's going to drive what it is you do and how important you are. And those are decided by your leadership. First, let me just say, rounding out that notion on the squad, Ilhan Omar, I might like them personally. I hate their politics, and I'll debate them until I'm blue in the face. But you can and should practice this limited war where we don't need to hate each other.
Well said.
I could like the person, but I staunchly disagree with their politics.
But that makes you a good diplomat, though. I mean, a diplomat can put aside feelings and say,
I think it just makes me a logical person.
"Yeah,
Why do we need to? I mean, anything short of something so fringe that it's just absolutely destructive. Anything short of that, and I got a variety of different friends. Voted most friends in high school. Not trying to brag.
that's." So I'm going to jump over to a topic that I'm hoping you have a little bit of inside information on. Life in the universe. Do you think that we're the only ones?
Fantastic questions. I think if you believe that the universe is infinite, which we have reason to believe that if it's not, it's darn close to it. The definition of infinite, not only is there intelligent life elsewhere, there has to be intelligent life elsewhere. Okay, if something goes on for, and there are infinite collections of stars and planets, certain distances to them. It it has to be, if you believe it's as big as it is, and so uh, yeah, I believe so. I don't have. This isn't ever anything that I went into the skiff, the secured room, and talked about or was briefed on. So I have no more insight than a consumer of this kind of stuff. But yeah,
It seems to be likely. I have I'm pretty close to a well-known um, a theoretical physicist, and I said to him,
uh-huh.
I think the same thing that you were saying is to say, like, infinite. What do you mean? He's like, it just keeps going. I'm like, okay, but all right, at some point, he goes, well, it just keeps going. I go, it's so hard to wrap your mind around. It's like forever. It just keeps
Yeah,
going. How is it even possible?
it's mind blowing. One of the profound things that we hear from people who've been to outer space and look down on the on Earth, we hear them come back and say, "Why are we killing each other?" Like, if you'd seen what I've seen, you realize how precious it is what we've got. We need to take care of it, and we need to take care of each other. And I think that gosh, if it were easy and cost effective, I wish everyone could go into outer space and see that.
Well said. Well said. The family and I are watching right now. We've been putting the kids through the Star Wars marathon and getting them up to
Oh,
speed
great!
about all these. And there's this one scene in this. It's a newer series by Star Wars, and it's called The Mandalorian.
I'm very familiar. I love it.
It was superb.
Pedro Pascal.
Yeah, and one of these moments, they were saying that once the Empire, once the Imperial, once their Death Star was blown up, a new group of bad guys came in and took over. It's almost like you get rid of one, there's already somebody there in the wing waiting. We are very quick to want to, as a country, or at least leadership, we want to remove certain dictators or who people we perceive, but isn't there just going to be like a vacuum filled? I mean, can't we learn from Star Wars? Like you do this, you realize there's another group of people. It's kind of like the devil you know versus the devil you don't know.
Exactly right. And I think that is baked into the tough calculus of deciding whether or not we ought to go topple a dictator simply because he's a bad guy. And hindsight's always 2020 on this. Is he bad, or is he going to be Hitler bad, where he's going to try and take over continents? And so it, it's tough. It's tough. Global leadership is tough, and every and everybody's an expert.
They are. Freedom of speech. Do you think it's under attack, or do you think that we're able to speak up?
It's under attack. I know for a fact I can't go out and say what's on my mind, um, because it's just not worth it. We have so many cases in which individuals had to backtrack from completely um, uh, acceptable remarks because they were just attacked as heck. The most recent case was the Kansas City Chiefs kicker, Harrison Butker. And I don't know, his controversial line was that something to the effect, and he was giving a commencement address as a Catholic at Benedictine, and he said something like, talking to you women in the crowd, some of you are going to go have great careers, and others could be and are very excited about being a wife and a mother. And that was controversial. I don't know. To receive flack from that, it's easier, and somebody who's been in the public eye, and so have you. I mean, it's just easier to just not say it. Well, what's that then? Are we cowering to bullies? I don't know. I like to shout it from the rooftop because apparently I'm pretty controversial. But yeah, there's commentary about uncontroversial things uh, by people on both sides of the aisle.
So, closing us out, what are you learning today?
It's that search, and I think I found it. We talked a little about it before, but I'm going to focus on family and moving to the South Pacific to get to know my wife's family, language, and culture, and to have kids.
And to have kids. So, it sounds like what you've learned is how to go from surviving to thriving.
Yeah.
Thank you for joining us on For Your Voice.
Thank you. It's been so great to talk with you.